Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today my voice is still trash, but I wanted to do a little bit of conversation about the long-term range forecasting for Black Adam, which just got updated over the last few days. Black Adam right now is expected to open to $55 to $70 million domestically. The question, of course, is going to be whether or not this is going to result in a film that is going to be a massive profit margin for Warner Brothers, or if it is going to be yet another high-cost, big budget loss. Again, I don't think it's going to be the latter in that situation. Rather, I don't think it's going to be the former in that situation of being a loss, but it is going to be interesting to follow these numbers, especially in comparison to the first of the franchise film, because really Black Adam is very much within that universe of Shazam as well, with a lot of these powers coming from the same places. And so we'll talk about this in comparison to that movie as well, to get a better idea about where this movie will end up standing and what it means for it going forward. But before any further, before going any further, please make sure you smash that like button, lap that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification on that way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So my voice is trash today, and my brain apparently is not fully working either. But as you can see from Box Office Pro, this is a most recent update from just a few days ago. The Black Adam film is expected to open in a range of somewhere. I know River, very excited for Black Adam, she is. But it says right here, Black Adam expected to open to $55 to $70 million domestically, with its total domestic run expected to be somewhere between $135 and $175. Now, already, my brain immediately goes to the fact that if the total domestic number projection for this movie is only $135 to $175, that's not a very good sign. I mean, this is a property featuring The Rock, who is probably one of the biggest stars in the world. Now, I think that we clearly can see, not just from this, but from previous films in other markets and from previous actors' releases, that stars don't really sell movies anymore. We don't really see that being a big part of it. You look to films like Top Gun with Tom Cruise, and it's not just that Tom Cruise was the reason people wanted to go see it. People wanted to go see it because it was just a fun movie. It was a very well-made, entertaining movie that a lot of people were able just to be able to escape into. Tom Cruise was a major part of that fact of how the film was made and the presentation, like the end result that we got. But people weren't actually going out of their way necessarily to say, yeah, I want to go see Tom Cruise, or I want to go see the new Tom Cruise movie. It was more so, hey, I want to go see this film that Tom Cruise happened to be a part of. And so I think that when we look to films like Black Adam, people are going to look at this film and say, hey, The Rock's got a lot of fans, he's got a lot of followers, but just because you have a lot of followers does not mean that those people are going to actually show up. One, doesn't mean that they're going to show up, and two, doesn't mean that they're real either, as we have learned from the ever-going saga with Twitter and Elon Musk over the bottle of bots. What am I doing with words this morning? The reason why I also am looking at this number and saying, okay, this doesn't look all that great for the movie is because I'm pulling up these numbers for Shazam. Now, Shazam's opening weekend was $53.5 million. This is with the adjusted for inflation toggle turned on the numbers. So the entire first weekend run for the first Shazam film was $56.8 million. So the fact that this movie is expected to, on the low end, match that of the original Shazam movie is telling me a couple of things, right? It's telling me that, okay, this movie might make a little bit more money because maybe having The Rock in the film is going to be a very small factor and is going to result in an extra, $10 to $20 million in the domestic marketplace. But it also is not taking into consideration the fact that The Rock is an international star. And so we could see the film, while not having as much of an impact domestically, it could have a much bigger impact having The Rock as the lead of your film in the international marketplaces. As we know, again, people tend to like The Rock all across the world. But the other number that I was looking at is that total domestic. So the total domestic run for the first Shazam film back in 2019 was $140.5 million. This film is projected to make somewhere between $135 and $175. So we're looking at a movie that either is going to match that of the first Shazam film. Again, even though this is not a Shazam movie, it is still within the same world, within the same power structure. And so that's why I'm thinking that having these two films compared to each other is actually, a pretty fair thing to say. But also looking to the total domestic for this movie, $140.5 million, tells me that the movie is expected to do maybe a little bit better. And obviously, these are very early numbers. We could see these numbers change. We could see the film end up being a massive box office hit for all we know. especially if the word of mouth is very strong, could end up performing much better than these early projections are indicating. But it is, I think, still kind of a worrying sign this early on for the numbers to be as low as they are. Now, it could be that box office prognosticators are trying to be a little bit more careful because they have, swung for the fences before on other movies and have, missed quite royally and quite epically. So it could just be that they're trying to maybe hold back a little bit, get this as close to that of the first Shazam film, or the very least within that ballpark, so that way they can try to say, yeah, we thought the film could do well, but we weren't quite sure, and so we wanted to have it in this range. Or it could be that this is just where things are. If you look at the current state of the box office, we really haven't had a lot of new films coming out, and this is going to be really the next major film release to get. If you look at the films that we have set to come out, we have Bros, which is not going to appeal to mass audiences, I imagine. You then have the horror film Smile, which does at least seem interesting, but this film is actually trending downwards. The most recent update had the film's opening weekend trending down 21%. Now, we'll get an update over the next couple of days for what the actual projections for this weekend are going to be. But still, $12 to $17 million, 21% lower, $30 to $55 million domestic total. Because of a film like this likely costing a lot less money, coming from Paramount, this is likely to be a film that's going to be able to make its money back. But you have films like that. Amsterdam, don't even know much about that film. Lila Crocodile. Halloween Ends, finally it's ending, but that's another film. The Banshees of Inisherin sounds interesting, I guess, but it's a Disney Searchlight picture, so who knows? And then Black Adam. So Black Adam is really the next major release that we have over the course of the next month. And if this movie is not going to be able to really light up the box office in a way that we haven't really seen since the summertime, it could be an early sign as well that some of the other films like Wakanda Forever or some of the other later releases in December might be struggling to find an audience. Now, I think that's because currently we're living in the age where, and I mentioned this in previous videos, where people are being a lot more careful with their money. People are being a lot more careful with what they spend their money on, what movies they go to see by result. I know River, she totally understands because it's like, yeah, I don't want to spend and waste my money on a film that is not going to end up, entertaining me. So the big thing is going to be whether or not Black Adam is going to be able to actually entertain the audience, or whether it's just going to be yet another generic Hollywood superhero movie, which has seemed to hit kind of a lull in a certain way, right? It seems that they have hit themselves, really shot themselves in the foot with having a very standardized version of storytelling. And by having that very standardized version of storytelling, it means more and more people are going to say, oh, I've seen this movie before. This film seems familiar. There's nothing new to this. Hey, how about instead I just stay at home, wait for this film to come out online, and then I'll eventually see it, and it's not something that I feel like I have to, break my neck to go out and see. So it's going to be incredibly interesting to see where this film ends up in the next few weeks as these numbers continue to update and when we finally get those official box office openings. But I just wanted to put this up against that of Shazam because I do think it's going to be an interesting comparison. One thing especially is that budget. The first Shazam film only cost $85 million, which is very much on the low end. Black Adam, we don't have a production budget, at least according to the numbers. We'll go ahead and do our quick little Wikipedia search to see if there is any update for this, because if I had to guess, I would suspect that Black Adam, especially with having someone like The Rock in the movie, among other things, would be somewhere between $150 and $200 million if I had to guess. So as you can see, right now we don't have any actual budget for the movie as of the recording of this video. But as I said, I think it's going to be somewhere around $150 million or more. So with that being the case, and with this film only doing marginally better than Shazam, and again, that international number could very well be much larger than what we saw for Shazam, as The Rock has a much more international appeal. You start to see that with that much larger budget, you're looking at a film making what? Maybe closer to $500 to $700 million in its run. And then you take into account that $200 million potential $200 million production budget, and you start to realize, oh yeah, that actually puts it into a position where it could still end up making just barely any profit, if any, depending on how successful or how not successful it is. Or it could end up just being yet another generic, hey, yeah, made $50 million to $100 million in net gain profit, which, hey, it's profit, but in comparison to its compared to its likely budget, it really isn't going to be all that impressive. And so, as I said, early on, based on these initial numbers, Black Adam seems to be, at least at first glance, to be in a little bit of trouble. Now, not to say that it's a big amount of trouble, not to say that it's a guaranteed flop, but it doesn't seem like this film is catching fire as much as Warner Brothers would probably like to. And this really does seem to be a Warner Brothers problem. As you all know, Warner Brothers tends to be, every year, the last couple of years at least, one of the biggest box office losers as far as the amount of films they put out, how much they've spent on them. And that's why you see some of the changes going on behind the scenes with the films that are not being released and the films that are being planned for the future, and also them trying to really slim down those budgets, which I think is ultimately a good thing because, hey, one of my favorite, I know, River, it's crazy, but one of my favorite films to this day, my favorite DCEU film is actually the first Shazam movie. That's actually my favorite. I cannot wait for Shazam 2 because of that very reason. Everything else from the DCEU has been either very bland or just has been downright bad. And so I look to that and I think to myself, maybe that's the direction they need to start going in, is spending less money on their films and getting a higher quality product versus throwing out $150 to $250 million per product only to put out a very mundane, very artificial, very just bland product and not making much money in return, or any money at all for that matter. But what are y'all's thoughts about this? Do you think it is a fair comparison to put this up against the first Shazam film? I do think that The Rock is a very major, it's again, it's an X factor. So how successful this movie is going to be, I think, is going to ultimately come down to that international box office, especially with The Rock's appeal to international audiences. But I think that still domestically, having this up against the first Shazam movie, especially when you adjust those numbers for inflation, you start to recognize that, hey, it's in a seemingly better position than the first Shazam movie, but not by all that much. So let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, not that fire button. Honestly, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out for all of my September Patreon, Subscribestar, and Locals members. Starting off with my Patreon members, Chris from the 80s, that's his YouTube channel, Garrett Searles, Hymir Irie Hymason, Jeff Toon, Jonathan Carney, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Orange Eye Reviews, you can also find on YouTube by the same name, Rosetta Allen, YouTube's name is Eagle Rider, Stan Andrian, and Miss Martin Muses, and that is her YouTube channel. Thank y'all very much for supporting me over on Patreon. Also, for all my Subscribestar peeps, Matt317, that's his Twitch channel name, support him there. Storm Tracker, The R, Fast Reaction, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, and the K-Man. Thank you, K-Man, as well, and you can find him at xtheboundaries.co, and thanks to all of my Subscribestar members. And lastly, to my Locals members, Locals has definitely been hopping a lot more recently. Shout out to Miss Minnesota hockey fan, how about a hockey player, UAB Mad Dog, UAB Mad Dog, Mike Jackson for the win, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer Robert Barnes. Thank y'all for supporting me over on Locals. And an extra special shout out to newer members, Joey Horn, who is back once again, and the Empress of the Universe, Tina B. And if you want your name shouted out vocally at the end of every single live stream and video, make sure that you support me over on Patreon, Subscribestar, or Locals, and you can find out more information about it on those websites, and check out the top link in the video description below if you want to find out more about how to get that, access to podcasts that I do with John the Flickinger, and also how to be featured on the Chosen of Valhalla live stream, which I do once a month with my Chosen of Valhalla members, and it's always a lot of fun. Anyway, that's going to be it for me today. You guys all have an amazing rest of your day. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Beautiful people, and as always, God bless.